I set up my tent in a secluded area of the campground, excited for a peaceful weekend away. The forest around me was dense, with the sounds of wildlife creating an eerie symphony. As the sun set, I noticed a strange light flickering deep in the woods. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to investigate the source of the light. As I approached, the light suddenly vanished, leaving me in total darkness. Back at my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I heard footsteps crunching on the forest floor, growing closer to my campsite. My heart raced as I grabbed a flashlight and peered outside the tent. I saw a shadowy figure dart behind a tree, just beyond the reach of my light. I called out, but there was no response, only the sound of retreating footsteps. The next morning, I found strange symbols carved into the trees around my campsite. I felt a chill run down my spine, wondering who or what had been there. I decided to explore the area again, hoping to find some clues. As I walked deeper into the forest, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. The door creaked open, revealing a room filled with old camping gear and strange artifacts. Inside the cabin, I found a journal detailing bizarre encounters and mysterious lights. The entries were from campers who had stayed here years ago, describing similar experiences to mine. My fear grew, but so did my determination to uncover the truth. That night, I set up a camera to record any strange occurrences around my tent. Watching the footage, I saw a group of ghostly figures moving silently through the trees. The next day, I met an elderly local who told me the legend of the forest guardians. According to the legend, they protected the forest from those who sought to harm it. Realizing they meant no harm to me, I felt a sense of relief and gratitude. I spent the rest of my trip respecting the forest and leaving offerings for the guardians. As I left, I felt a sense of peace, knowing I had experienced something truly extraordinary. Back at my tent, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I heard footsteps crunching on the forest floor, growing closer to my campsite. My heart raced as I grabbed a flashlight and peered outside the tent. I saw a shadowy figure dart behind a tree, just beyond the reach of my light. I called out, but there was no response, only the sound of retreating footsteps. The next morning, I found strange symbols carved into the trees around my campsite. I felt a chill run down my spine, wondering who or what had been there. I decided to explore the area again, hoping to find some clues. As I walked deeper into the forest, I stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. The door creaked open, revealing a room filled with old camping gear and strange artifacts. Inside the cabin, I found a journal detailing bizarre encounters and mysterious lights. The entries were from campers who had stayed here years ago, describing similar experiences to mine. My fear grew, but so did my determination to uncover the truth. That night, I set up a camera to record any strange occurrences around my tent. Watching the footage, I saw a group of ghostly figures moving silently through the trees. The next day, I met an elderly local who told me the legend of the forest guardians. According to the legend, they protected the forest from those who sought to harm it. Realizing they meant no harm to me, I felt a sense of relief and gratitude. I spent the rest of my trip respecting the forest and leaving offerings for the guardians. As I left, I felt a sense of peace, knowing I had experienced something truly extraordinary. The next morning, I woke up to find my campsite undisturbed, but the strange symbols remained on the trees. My curiosity deepened as I packed a small bag and set off to explore further. The forest felt alive with whispers, leaves rustling and branches creaking as if sharing secrets. I came across a small stream, its clear water reflecting the sunlight in a mesmerizing dance. I followed the stream, hoping it would lead me to more answers. As I ventured deeper, I noticed the forest growing denser, the light dimming as the canopy thickened. The air grew cooler, and the sounds of wildlife faded into an eerie silence. My heart pounded as I stumbled upon another abandoned cabin, older and more decrepit than the first. The door hung loosely on its hinges, creaking ominously as I pushed it open. Inside, the air was musty, filled with the scent of decay and time. I found more journals inside, their pages yellowed and brittle. These entries spoke of encounters with the forest guardians, describing them as ethereal beings with a connection to nature. The journals detailed rituals to communicate with them, involving offerings and chants. My hands trembled as I read about one camper who claimed to have seen the guardians up close, their forms shimmering like mist. The account was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. That night, I decided to perform one of the rituals from the journal. I gathered the required items, flowers, stones, and a small amount of honey, and arranged them in a circle around my campfire. As I chanted the words, the flames flickered and danced, casting eerie shadows around me. The forest seemed to respond, the air growing thick with an electric charge. I felt a presence watching me, a mix of fear and reverence washing over me. As the ritual ended, the forest fell silent once more. I sat by the dying fire, feeling a sense of connection to the ancient spirits of the forest. In the distance, I saw faint, glowing figures moving through the trees, their forms blending with the shadows. They watched me for a moment before disappearing into the night. For the first time, I felt a sense of acceptance and belonging in the forest. The following morning, I woke up with a sense of anticipation. The symbols on the trees no longer seemed ominous, but rather like markers of an ancient path. I decided to follow them, hoping they would lead me to more insights about the forest guardians. The forest felt different now, almost welcoming, as if it recognized me. Birds chirped softly, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves, creating a serene atmosphere. As I walked, the symbols grew more intricate and frequent, guiding me deeper into the woods. I reached a clearing bathed in sunlight, with a large stone in the center covered in moss and vines. The stone had more carvings, depicting scenes of nature and spirits in harmony. I felt a powerful energy emanating from it, as if it was a sacred place. Kneeling by the stone, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling a profound connection to the forest. Suddenly, I heard a soft humming sound, almost like a melody carried by the wind. Opening my eyes, I saw ethereal figures emerging from the trees, their forms glowing softly. They moved gracefully, their presence both calming and awe-inspiring. The forest guardians had revealed themselves to me. One of them, a tall figure with eyes that seemed to hold the wisdom of ages, approached and gently touched my forehead. A flood of images and emotions washed over me, memories of the forest, its creatures, and the guardians who protected it. I understood their purpose and their connection to the land. They communicated without words, their thoughts and feelings blending seamlessly with mine. I felt their gratitude for respecting the forest and their sadness for those who didn't. It was an overwhelming yet beautiful experience, leaving me with a deep sense of understanding. As the vision faded, I found myself back in the clearing, the guardians gone, but their presence lingering. I knew I had to honor their legacy and share their story. Returning to my campsite, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I spent the rest of the day preparing to leave, ensuring I left no trace behind. As the sun set on my final night in the forest, I felt a peaceful contentment, knowing I had connected with something greater than myself. Packing up the next morning, I took one last look at the forest, feeling a mix of gratitude and reverence. The experience had changed me, deepening my appreciation for nature and its mysteries. Driving away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the guardians watching over me. Instead, I saw only the dense, beautiful forest, standing as a testament to the timeless bond between nature and those who respect it. On my final morning, I felt a bittersweet mix of sadness and gratitude. Packing up my campsite, I ensured I left nothing behind that could harm the forest. The symbols on the trees seemed to glow with a subtle light, a reminder of the guardian's presence. As I loaded the last of my gear into my car, I took a moment to thank the forest for its hospitality and the extraordinary experiences I had. Driving out of the campground, the events of the past few days played over in my mind like a vivid dream. The encounters with the guardians, the eerie symbols, and the ancient rituals had left an indelible mark on my soul. I felt a deep connection to the land and its timeless spirit, a bond that would stay with me forever. The road ahead seemed different, filled with new possibilities and a renewed sense of purpose. Back home, I began to research more about the legends of the forest guardians, finding references in local folklore and historical accounts. I decided to document my experiences, hoping to share the story with others who might respect and protect the natural world. Writing down every detail, I felt the same awe and reverence I had experienced in the forest. It was a story that needed to be told, a reminder of the magic and mystery that still exists in our world. Months later, I returned to the campground, this time with friends who were eager to experience the forest's wonders. I guided them to the sacred clearing, sharing the stories of my encounters. They were skeptical at first, but as night fell and the forest came alive with whispers and shadows, they began to sense the presence of the guardians. We performed the rituals together, leaving offerings and chanting the ancient words. As we sat by the campfire, the familiar glowing figures appeared, watching us from the shadows. My friends were awestruck, their skepticism replaced by a deep respect for the forest and its protectors. We spent the night in silent reverence, feeling a profound connection to the natural world. The guardians had accepted us, and we were honored to be part of their timeless legacy. Leaving the forest the next day, I knew I would return again and again. The experience had changed me, instilling a deep respect for nature and its mysteries. I felt a sense of peace and fulfillment, knowing I had been part of something extraordinary. As I drove away, I glanced back at the forest, the symbols on the trees shining brightly in the morning light. I smiled, feeling the guardian's presence with me, guiding me on my journey. I arrived at the campground with friends, ready for a weekend of adventure. We set up camp near a lake, surrounded by thick, whispering trees. On the first night, we heard distant chanting echoing through the forest. It was unsettling, but we brushed it off as another group of campers having fun. As we settled into our tents, the chanting grew louder and more distinct. The next morning, we found strange totems and symbols arranged around our campsite. Unease settled over us as we tried to understand their meaning. We decided to explore the forest to find the source of the chanting. Deep in the woods, we stumbled upon an ancient, overgrown stone circle. The air felt charged with an eerie energy, and we hurried back to camp. That night, we heard the chanting again, closer and more intense. I couldn't sleep, haunted by the strange symbols and the stone circle. Around midnight, a thick fog rolled in, obscuring everything beyond our tents. Shadows moved in the fog, accompanied by whispers we couldn't understand. We huddled together, fear gripping us as the whispers grew louder. The following day, we found fresh footprints around our camp, leading into the forest. Determined to uncover the truth, we followed the trail deeper into the woods. We discovered an old, weathered cabin hidden among the trees, much like the one in the previous story. Inside, we found old photographs and journals documenting strange rituals and gatherings. The last entry hinted at a secret society still operating in the area. That night, the chanting returned, louder and more menacing than before. The fog enveloped our campsite again, and the shadows seemed to close in on us. Suddenly, the chanting stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. We never found out who or what was behind the mysterious occurrences. As we packed up to leave, we couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, the mystery unsolved. The next morning, we found strange totems and symbols arranged around our campsite. Unease settled over us as we tried to understand their meaning. We decided to explore the forest to find the source of the chanting. Deep in the woods, we stumbled upon an ancient, overgrown stone circle. The air felt charged with an eerie energy, and we hurried back to camp. That night, we heard the chanting again, closer and more intense. Unable to sleep, I ventured out of the tent with my flashlight. The fog was thicker than before, swirling around our campsite like a living entity. As I moved cautiously through the mist, I saw faint, shadowy figures dancing around the stone circle. The figures moved rhythmically, their chanting growing louder and more hypnotic. My heart pounded as I watched from behind a tree, unsure whether to approach or retreat. Suddenly, one of the figures turned towards me, and our eyes met. It was a woman, her face obscured by a hood, but her eyes glowed with an unnatural light. Panicking, I stumbled backward, snapping a twig underfoot. The chanting stopped abruptly, and the figures vanished into the fog as if they had never been there. I raced back to the tent, waking my friends and recounting what I had seen. We decided to stay up the rest of the night, taking turns keeping watch. As dawn broke, we gathered our things, ready to leave the campground. But before we could pack up, we found a new totem at the edge of our camp. This one was different, more elaborate, with feathers and small animal bones woven into it. It felt like a warning, a final message from the mysterious figures. We were too unnerved to stay any longer, but curiosity compelled us to take one last look around. We ventured back to the stone circle in the daylight, hoping to find some explanation. The place felt different under the sun, less menacing, but still charged with a strange energy. We noticed markings on the stones that looked like ancient runes, worn by time. One of my friends, Sarah, pulled out her phone to take pictures of the runes. As she did, her phone screen flickered and then went black. She tried to restart it, but it was dead. Frustrated and scared, we decided to leave the circle and return to camp. On our way back, we heard a rustling in the bushes and saw a deer watching us, its eyes reflecting a deep, knowing intelligence. Back at camp, we discussed our options. Leaving immediately seemed wise, but a part of us wanted answers. We decided to stay one more night, keeping the fire burning and staying vigilant. As darkness fell, the forest seemed to close in on us. The usual sounds of wildlife replaced by an oppressive silence. Around midnight, the chanting started again, this time from multiple directions. It felt like we were surrounded. The fog rolled in, thicker than before, and shadows danced just out of sight. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from the fire, determined to confront whatever was out there. My friends followed, staying close. We moved towards the stone circle, the chanting growing louder with each step. As we reached the edge, the fog parted, revealing the hooded figures once more. They formed a circle around the stones, their movements synchronized and deliberate. This time, we stood our ground, trying to make sense of the ritual. One figure stepped forward, pulling back their hood to reveal an old woman with piercing blue eyes. The old woman's piercing blue eyes locked onto mine. She raised her hand, and the chanting ceased, leaving an eerie silence. My friends and I stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. She began to speak in a language that none of us understood, her voice both soothing and commanding. As she spoke, the other hooded figures remained still, their eyes fixed on us. Suddenly, the old woman switched to English. "You should not be here," she said, her voice echoing through the forest. "This place is sacred. You must leave and never return." Her words sent a chill down my spine, and I felt an overwhelming urge to obey. But curiosity got the best of me. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice trembling. "We are the keepers of the old ways," she replied. "We protect the balance between the seen and unseen." She stepped closer, and I could see the wisdom and age etched into her face. "You have disrupted the harmony. Now you must go before it is too late." With that, she turned and rejoined the circle, the chanting resuming as if nothing had happened. We backed away slowly, the fog closing in around us once more. Back at camp, we packed up our belongings hastily, the urgency in the old woman's words ringing in our ears. As we loaded the car, we noticed that the totem from earlier was gone, replaced by a single white feather. It felt like a final warning. Driving away from the campground, the forest seemed to watch us leave, its secrets remaining hidden. The road stretched ahead, and the sense of danger slowly faded. We didn't speak much, each lost in our thoughts about what we had witnessed. The memory of the old woman's eyes stayed with me, a reminder of the mysteries we had encountered. A few miles down the road, Sarah's phone suddenly powered back on, displaying a photo of the runes. We stared at it in silence, knowing we had glimpsed something ancient and powerful. The forest's mysteries remained unsolved, but one thing was clear. We would never return to that campground. The old woman's eyes locked onto mine, and she began to speak in a language I couldn't understand. Her voice was low and melodic, weaving through the chanting of the others. My friends and I stood frozen, unsure whether to flee or stay. The old woman raised her arms, and the chanting grew louder, resonating deep within my chest. Suddenly, the chanting stopped, and the forest fell into an eerie silence. The old woman pointed to the ground at our feet, and we noticed a faint glow emanating from the earth. a symbol began to form, etched in light, pulsating with energy. It looked like the runes we had seen earlier, but more intricate and alive. We watched in awe and fear as the symbol grew brighter, the light almost blinding. The old woman spoke again, this time in English. She warned us that we had trespassed on sacred ground and disturbed the spirits that dwelled within the forest. She told us that we must leave immediately and never return, or face the wrath of the forest guardians. Before we could respond, the figures vanished into the fog, leaving us alone with the glowing symbol. We backed away slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. We hurried back to camp, frantically packing up our belongings. The fog thickened, making it hard to see, and every sound seemed amplified, as if the forest was alive and watching us. As we made our way to the car, the chanting began again, faint but persistent. We stumbled through the fog, guided by the dim light of our flashlights. Reaching the car, we threw our gear in and sped away, not daring to look back. The chanting faded as we left the forest behind, but the sense of dread lingered. Driving away, we vowed never to speak of what had happened. The memory of the glowing symbol and the old woman's warning haunted us, a reminder of the mysterious and powerful forces we had encountered. We didn't know if the guardians would ever seek us out, but we knew we would never return to that campground. Weeks passed, and life slowly returned to normal, but the experience at the campground never left my mind. One evening, as I was going through my belongings, I found the journal we had taken from the cabin. Curiosity got the better of me, and I started reading it again, hoping to find some answers. The journal described similar encounters, each more terrifying than the last. The final entry was written by someone named Daniel, who had disappeared without a trace. He mentioned the same old woman, the stone circle, and the glowing symbols. His last words were a plea for anyone reading to leave the forest alone and respect its secrets. I showed the journal to my friends, and we decided to research Daniel's disappearance. We found an old newspaper article about a hiker who had gone missing in the same area we had camped. The article mentioned strange occurrences and local legends about the forest being haunted. It seemed that Daniel had been one of many who had encountered the guardians. Determined to uncover the truth, we reached out to the local historical society. They confirmed the legends and told us about a secret society that once performed rituals to protect the forest. The society had disbanded years ago, but their practices had left a lasting mark on the land. The guardians, it seemed, were real and still active. The more we learned, the more we realized how lucky we had been to escape unscathed. The guardians were not malevolent, but they were fiercely protective of their domain. We had trespassed on sacred ground and disturbed their peace. It was a sobering reminder of the power of nature and the mysteries that still exist in the world. In the end, we decided to keep the journal as a reminder of our experience. We vowed never to return to the forest and to respect the legends and warnings we had encountered. The memory of that weekend would stay with us forever, a testament to the unknown and the eerie beauty of the forest guardians. I arrived at the campground alone, seeking solace after a recent heartbreak. The forest was quiet, with a gentle breeze rustling the leaves. As night fell, I built a campfire and tried to relax under the stars. Suddenly, I heard a soft sobbing sound coming from the darkness. I followed the sound, heart aching with empathy. I found a young woman sitting by a tree, tears streaming down her face. She introduced herself as Emily and said she was mourning a lost loved one. We talked for hours, sharing our stories and finding comfort in each other's company. Over the next few days, Emily and I grew closer, bonding over our shared grief. We explored the forest together, discovering its hidden paths and serene spots. One evening, she suggested we take a walk to a clearing she had found. The clearing was beautiful, with wildflowers and a view of the setting sun. As we sat in the clearing, Emily began to act strangely, her demeanor shifting. She spoke of a cabin in the forest where she used to visit with her fiancé. Intrigued, I agreed to accompany her to the cabin. We walked in silence, the forest growing darker and more foreboding with each step. The cabin appeared suddenly, old and decaying, hidden among the trees. Inside, it was filled with dust and cobwebs, as if untouched for years. Emily's eyes filled with tears as she showed me a photograph of her and a man who looked eerily familiar. She whispered that he was her fiancé, who had disappeared years ago. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with sadness. Emily told me how her fiancé had vanished without a trace during one of their camping trips. She believed his spirit was still here, trapped in the forest. My heart ached for her, and I vowed to help uncover the truth. We spent the night in the cabin, hoping to find some clues. The wind howled outside, making the old structure creak and groan. In the early hours, I awoke to find Emily gone. Panicked, I rushed outside, calling her name. The forest responded with silence, deep and unsettling. I found her at the clearing, standing motionless, staring at the sky. She turned to me, her eyes filled with sorrow and a hint of something I couldn't quite place. She spoke of hearing her fiancé's voice calling her name, urging her to join him. Fear gripped me, and I pleaded with her to return to the cabin. Reluctantly, she agreed, but her mood grew increasingly distant and melancholic. Over the next few days, strange occurrences plagued us. Shadows moved in the corners of our eyes, and whispers filled the night air. Emily became more withdrawn, her connection to the forest deepening. One night, as I was gathering firewood, I found a hidden diary beneath the floorboards of the cabin. The entries detailed the couple's last days together, their joy, and the mysterious disappearance. The final entry was a desperate plea for help, ending abruptly. My hands trembled as I read, realizing the gravity of the situation. One night, as I was gathering firewood, I found a hidden diary beneath the floorboards of the cabin. The entries detailed the couple's last days together, their joy, and the mysterious disappearance. The final entry was a desperate plea for help, ending abruptly. My hands trembled as I read, realizing the gravity of the situation. I returned to the cabin to find Emily gone again. Panic surged through me as I retraced our steps to the clearing. There she stood, at the edge of the clearing, staring into the forest. She turned to me, her face a mask of sorrow and resignation. She said she had to go, that she could no longer resist the call of her fiancé. I pleaded with her to stay, but her mind was made up. She walked into the forest, and I followed, determined not to lose her. As we walked deeper, the air grew colder, and the forest seemed to close in around us. The trees whispered, and shadows danced at the edge of my vision. Emily stopped at a large, ancient tree. She turned to me one last time, tears in her eyes. She thanked me for everything and said she had to find peace. She stepped into the tree, and it seemed to absorb her, leaving only the echoes of her final words. I stood there, numb with grief, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The forest returned to its eerie silence, and I was alone. I made my way back to the cabin, feeling the weight of the loss. As I packed up to leave, I found a note from Emily, thanking me and asking me to remember her story. I left the forest with a heavy heart, forever changed by the encounter.